Hello, welcome or welcome back to the Yarn and Yarns YouTube channel. My name is Angela and all the places you can find me should be linked in the description box below this video. Here on the channel you'll find me chatting about my adventures in knitting, spinning, crochet and weaving, all of the fibre related things. Today's video is a little catch up with our current make along, or one of our current make alongs. A couple of months ago I popped up a video announcing that I would be setting myself a little challenge of trying to use up some of my sock yarn scraps in particular. When I mentioned this over on my Patreon, a few of the members over there asked whether I would consider popping up a make along so that everyone could join in. There is a video from a couple of months on the YouTube channel here announcing that and just chatting about what we're doing, but basically we're using up leftovers, odds and ends to make beautiful new projects, and we're going to carry on through till the end of 2024. So I have my own personal little challenge of trying to use up at least 700 grams of sock weight scraps, and so I thought now that the make along has been in full swing for a couple of months, I would hop on and check in and share with you some of the projects that I've finished for the make along. And also at the end I thought I might share a little slideshow of some of the projects that have either been made or I've been working on by our community. We've got a hashtag going on over on Instagram, which is hashtag YNYScrapMal, and there's also a couple of threads over on the Ravelry group for any Ravelry users. So I'm going to steal a few pictures from Instagram and Ravelry and do a little bit of a slideshow at the end of the video as well, just to share some of the beautiful projects that our community members are making. I've been knitting a lot of socks. Of course, you know, sock yarn scraps don't have to be used for socks, but given that I've been doing quite a lot of travelling up and down the country over the last few months, socks are just the perfect portable project. So I'm happy to share with you my big pile of socks. Let's just grab them all. So I have made all of these in the last couple of months, and I've also made one other project, and I've got a work in progress to share with you as well. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a sock heavy update, but that's just what I've been in the mood to work on. A couple of these projects you've already seen, I think, in my March making wrap up, but a lot of these have been finished in the last couple of months, so you won't have seen them. Shall I share the finished objects first, or shall I share my work in progress? Let's go work in progress first, shall we? Yeah, let's do that. I've been using this make along as an excuse to knit some patterns that have been in my queue or on my radar for a little while. This project is definitely one of those. I'm currently knitting a pattern called Stripe Tees by General Hogbuffer, and they have lots of patterns that are free to download over on Ravelry. I don't think I found them anywhere else. I think we had a little look because someone asked me when I posted this on Instagram, but the patterns are free, so if you're not able to use Ravelry, then hopefully you'll have a Ravelry using friend who might be able to download and share the pattern with you. I'm sure that's okay because of the fact that they are published for free. But yeah, there's loads of different sock patterns I've knit at least one other pattern by this designer before, maybe two, but there's lots of really interesting construction methods as just well as lovely patterns. So I am currently knitting a pattern called Stripe Tees, and the pattern is originally designed to work with a self-striping yarn and to play with the way that that yarn knits up. I'm knitting mine with scraps. So here is sock number one. Lots of different little scraps have gone into my Stripe Tees, and I'll share with you my sock in progress, which will demonstrate a little bit more about the interesting construction of this sock. So here is my sock number 2 in progress, and basically you cast on and knit the cuff, and then you knit these sort of narrow skinny stripes to construct the sock. There's lots of picking up stitches, so if you're not a fan of that, then maybe this wouldn't be the pattern for you. But if you're okay with that, it's no more difficult than when you knit a heel flap and gusset and you have to pick up stitches down the side of your sock. But it's a nice way to play with your yarns. A few people asked me when I posted a picture on Instagram whether this was intarsia, and as I say, it is not. You knit round the cuff and then you're working backwards and forwards across a narrow strip of stitches until you kind of construct the sock. So for this I have now knit the cuff and the back of the leg. I'm then going to go on to knit the heel flap, then the underside of the foot, and then you come back and knit the top of the foot, and then you add the toe in at the end. So there's no sewing up other than the last few stitches where you graft the toe. It's just a really fun pattern, and I kind of got myself a little bit addicted to this, and the first sock flew off the needles. And I'm sure you can imagine, you can't really see it too well in my sock because I've used lots of different scraps, but I'm sure you can imagine the fun effect that you might get from a self-striping yarn with the bands of colour sort of going down the sock in different ways. The other clever thing about this pattern is there's a couple of different options for knitting the sole of the foot. So there is a 3 stripe option, which is the one that I've done. But if you might be worried about how the sort of ridge for the pickup of stitches might feel on the bottom of your foot, there is an adaptation in the pattern where you can knit the whole of the foot as one piece. So you don't have to do the 3 stripe version. For my sock, because I was using a lot of little scraps and bits and pieces, I decided to try and bring it together a little bit and not make it entirely scrappy by using a 50-gram skein of yarn that I had in my stash, the blue yarn. Because my 2 socks are going to be completely different, I decided to try and make them look a bit more like a pair by adding lots of stripes of this blue. So every other stripe on my sock is with this blue yarn, which I think is just a drops yarn. I believe it was one of those where I ordered from one of the larger yarn suppliers here in the UK, and usually you can get free postage if you spend over a certain amount. So I think there's been times in the past where I've thrown in a 50-gram skein of drop sock yarn or similar, just to kind of push myself over that free postage threshold and get extra yarn rather than have to pay for postage. I'm sure we've all done that. Stripe Tees by General Hog Buffer. And I don't think there's too much else to say about it other than it's a really fun pattern, and I'm using it as an excuse to use up lots of little bits and pieces of yarn. Obviously some of my stripes, they've been completely completed in one yarn, but there's quite a few where I've just pulled in different yarns that I've got. Completely addicted to that sock pattern, and I feel like I may, now that I've knit one and I know I've kind of knit it to my sort of size, I've tried it on and it fits okay, so I might grab a skein of self-striping sock yarn from my stash and knit another pair of these for myself. The pairs that I'm knitting for our make along are going into my pile to send off to charity at the end of the year. It's my current scrappy work in progress, the Stripe Tee sock by General Hog Buffer. Just keeping that in a project bag that I made myself quite some time ago now. Could do with a bit of a wash. It's been on travels this year, lots of travels. So let's move on to finished objects. I'm going to share with you the one non-sock project that I finished, and if you watched my recent making wrap up, you'll have already seen this project anyway. I thought I would share it with you here just in case you haven't watched that video and you're only interested in this update. But I've recently finished a scrap bucket, which is a lovely pattern by Tracy of the Passionate Spinner podcast, and it's for a knitted project bag, and you use 2 strands of 4-ply or fingering weight held together and make this lovely, what is basically a reversible bag. So if I unfold the bag, you can kind of see how the bag is constructed, and you can use either side as the outside of your bag, so you're almost getting 2 project bags in one. You could knit 2 entirely different colours or use entirely different scraps to give yourself kind of 2 different looks from the one project bag if you wanted. As you can see, I use lots of blue and some yarns with a hint of purple into my scrap bucket, and at the end you knit some I-cord to form the sort of drawstring. This is the second scrap bucket that I've knit. I knit an orange one probably a couple of years ago now, and I can definitely see myself knitting some more of these. It's a great way to use up leftovers and bits and pieces. I can see a little shelf of rainbow scrap buckets in my future. On to my sock finished objects, and as I've already mentioned, I'm going to be piling these up and then I shall send them off to a charity for hopefully folks who might need and appreciate a pair of knitted woolly socks. The first couple of pairs of socks I've already shared back in my making roundup for sort of March, April time, so you may have already seen these before. I'm not going to spend too long talking about them, but we're getting lots of new lovely folks finding the channel all the time, so welcome if you are new here. I thought I would share these socks again just in case you might not have seen them or you don't remember. So the first pair of socks, the ones that kicked off my little scrap yarn using extravaganza, are these. And as you can probably guess, I pulled out lots of little bits and pieces from my leftover stash in pinks and purples, and then I just divided the little balls of yarn that I had in two and knit a pair of somewhat matching socks. Some of these yarns were sort of self-striping or self-patterning, so they're not exactly the same, but I think you can tell as we go up the sock that I've used the same yarns for each sort of stripe progression. So yeah, those were the socks that kicked off this make along, and I haven't stopped knitting scrappy socks since. The second pair of socks are the two colour socks, which is a pattern by Joji Locatelli, and these particular ones sort of kicked off my thought to try and use some of the sock patterns that I'd either had in my queue or in my library or had been on my radar for quite some time. This pattern by Joji was released quite a few years ago, and I purchased the pattern as soon as the sock pattern was released because I really fell in love with the stripes and the different textures. It just seemed like a really interesting knit. And then for one reason or another, I never found an excuse to actually cast them on. I'm sure many of us can relate to that. The purchasing of patterns because you're really excited about it and then you don't quite get to cast them on straight away. So yeah, for these I used some West Yorkshire spinners, which was left over from the Stephen West mystery sock knit along last year. I think they were called the Contrast Blast socks. Then I had this random ball in my leftovers, which I think I might have purchased from a friend who was selling a bunch of their sock yarn leftovers, and I at the time was making a big scrappy blanket, and I have quite a few balls left over from the sort of big bundle that I purchased that didn't get used in that blanket. If I'd have knit these a little bit longer in the foot, I think I would have kept these for myself because I love the combination of the sort of speckly yarn with this West Yorkshire spinners, and I really, as I say, really enjoyed knitting these. The fact that you're sort of changing the pattern ever so slightly as you go down, do this lovely stripe section, then there's a lace section, then there's a texture section, and then another sort of little change at the bottom for the toe, just kept it really interesting. But yeah, I didn't quite knit the feet on these long enough to fit me, so they definitely have to go in the charity pile. Maybe one day I shall make myself a pair of these. I've got such a big sock collection for myself at the moment. It's not going to stop me knitting socks for myself, but it's quite nice to still knit the socks but not necessarily have to accumulate the socks, if that makes sense. So I'm quite happy to have this knit along as an excuse to make all of the socks, but also hopefully to give them away to a good cause at the end of the year. I'm not adding to my own personal sock collection. Next up I have the Candyman socks, which is a pattern by Lisa K. Ross, and this pattern was kindly gifted to me by my lovely friend Ange, so thank you so much Angie for these. She gifted them to me after I announced the scrap make along and said she thought that these would be a perfect sock pattern for using in this, and they absolutely were. I used some opal yarn that was recently left over from a pair of socks that I knit for a work colleague, and I paired that just with some black opal that I had left over in my stash. And these were again another really fun pattern with a little bit of striping, a little bit of texture patterning here. I did end up accidentally messing up the pattern slightly. They've got this seam in the sock, and I think mine are both on the same side. They should be on opposite sides, but hey, it doesn't really matter, does it? I won't tell anyone if you don't. So yeah, I really like how the sort of blue opal sort of self-patterning works again with the black. And again, just a really fun pattern. I can highly recommend the Candyman. And I know that there's at least one person out there, hi Beverly, who has also knit a pair of Candyman recently finished. So I might try and steal a picture from Beverly to add that to the slideshow at the end. The next pair of socks are probably the pair or the pattern that has been in my queue for the longest time. Ever since I became a sock knitter, I had this sock pattern on my radar and I just never got around to knitting it, so this was the perfect excuse. And this pattern is called the Love Sock. Now I've only got one sock on the blocker because the fun detail is on the heel, so I'm going to just hold one of these up. It's got this really fun love heart design on the heel of the sock, and this is a combination. You can do a few rows in colour work, but you do have to do a little bit of intarsia to knit this heart pattern on the heel. In the original pattern, the whole entire sock is striped, like on my leg here, but I didn't have enough of this sort of really delicately speckled yarn. I believe this was a Regia yarn that I had used in one of the previous Yarn Yarns advent calendars, and I had a little bit left over. But I knew I didn't have enough to stripe the whole sock. I split my speckly yarn in half and knit down the leg. I realised I wouldn't have enough to do the whole foot, so I reserved what was left to add a tiny little striped pattern to the toe. That wasn't in the sock pattern at all, but I just wanted to use up as much of my speckly yarn as I could. And then I used some plain white for the heel, and then a little scrap of pink for that heart pattern. And again, I believe that is a free pattern over on Ravelry. I can't remember the designer off the top of my head, but I'll have my projects linked below. And then my final pair of socks, my most recently finished, is another pattern that was gifted to me by Angie. She's such a kind and generous friend. Thank you so much, Angie. I had so much fun knitting these, and these are the Bits and Bobs socks, I think they're called. I keep wanting to say Bits and Pieces, but I think they're called Bits and Bobs by Morgan Panich, P-A-N-I-C-H. And again, I just grabbed a whole bunch of my smaller skeins of leftovers and divided them up to make a pair of lovely socks. They've got a little bit of a colourwork detail every time you change the yarn, and yeah, just had a lot of fun with these. Now I'm gonna have a little bit of confession time with these, because you know we always share our lovely finished objects, but once I had washed and blocked these, I discovered, to my horror, three glaring errors in this sock. The first is I have not one but two drop stitches. I don't know if you can see those. One there, one there. How in the world did that happen? Like, I've knit a million pairs of socks, I never do that, and I certainly never not notice. You know, maybe I go a row or two and realise something's a bit off. But yeah, there's two drop stitches there. So I've pulled the loops out so that they're clearly visible. I'm going to go back in and pick up those stitches and knit those back in, secure them on the inside. It's not such a big deal. And the other thing that I've also managed to do is, in that same stripe, I was knitting these while I was caring for my gran, so I'm going to use that as an excuse. I wasn't getting much sleep in the 10 days that I stayed with my gran, so yeah, completely blaming that. On this same stripe here, I've missed out one of the rows of colour work for the sort of change between the blue and the pink. I'm just going to go over and duplicate stitch in the stitches that I've missed. I'm not going to unpick a whole foot of a sock just to correct one row of colour work back there where it was not really going to make a difference in the scheme of things. So yeah, I've got a little bit of mending to do on my newly finished sock. But I thought I would share that with you to give you a little bit of a giggle. We're none of us perfect, are we? So yeah, that is my current making roundup for our scrap make along. Now, I said back at the beginning of the video that my target was to try and use at least 700 grams of scraps before the end of the year, and I'm super happy to say that I've already used just over 600 grams worth of scrappy yarn, so I'm well on target to meet my goal, and hopefully I should smash that goal. I've got plenty of scraps to use, so I'm not going to run out anytime soon, and my plan is just to continue working through as many as I can for the rest of the year. So yeah, there we go, my little update. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you have been joining in with our make along, please let me know in the comments below what you've been making. Don't forget to share your pictures either on the Ravelry thread or over on Instagram. I will put some prizes together for the end of the year. I'd love to know if you found any new favourite patterns for using up your leftovers, scraps, little treasures, however you like to refer to them. Please leave your ideas for patterns in the comments below, because I'm sure both myself and the other community members that are joining our make along would love to have more pattern inspiration. I'm going to say goodbye now, but I shall leave you with a little slideshow, hopefully, if I can pull it together, of not all, because that would take a long time and time is very precious at the moment. I don't have much of it. But I'm going to put together a little slideshow of some of the photos that have been shared by our community members for the projects that they've been working on for this make along. I'll be back again soon with some more making content, so I hope you will join me for the next video. Until we do get to spend time together again, I hope you get to do some of the things that you enjoy. Great big woolly hugs to you all. Bye for now. Bye.